All right, I'm beginning to record now. Let me again officially welcome everybody to today's event. And I'd like to turn things directly over to our moderator, Karen McLaughlin, who is the Secretary and Treasurer of the International Organization for Victim Assistance. Ms. McLaughlin.
I'd like to welcome everyone to all of our speakers and our online audience to our webcast today. The webcast is being sponsored by the Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons from the United States Department of State. And we are also co-sponsored by the Initiative to Stop Human Trafficking at the Harvard Kennedy School, the Carr Center on Human Rights Policy. Christina Bain is here with us today, and we thank her for all of her work to put this together. I want to also thank the other sponsor, which is the Government Innovators Network at the Harvard Kennedy School. Thank you to Jim for your technical expertise. We hope we don't have to rely on you throughout this webcast, Jim. I want to first begin by introducing our first speaker and keynote, Ambassador Lou C. Dibaka. He is, as of May of 2009, the ambassador that was appointed by President Obama to coordinate U.S. government activities in the global fight against contemporary forms of slavery. He serves as a senior advisor to Secretary of State Clinton and directs the State Department's Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons. That office assesses global trends, provides training and technical assistance, and advocates for the end of modern-day slavery. Ambassador Dibaka formerly served as the counsel of the House Judiciary Committee, where his portfolio included national security, intelligence, immigration, civil rights, and modern-day slavery issues. While at the Justice Department, Mr. Dibaka was one of the country's most decorated federal prosecutors, leading the investigation and prosecution of cases involving money laundering, organized crime, alien smuggling, official misconduct, hate crimes, and human trafficking. He's had numerous honors and awards by the Attorney General, a Distinguished Service Award for his service as the lead trial counsel in the largest slavery prosecution in U.S. history. It involved over 300 Vietnamese and Chinese workers in a garment factory in American Samoa that were enslaved. Additionally, he received the Department's award, the highest litigation honor, the Attorney General John Marshall Award, and the Director's Award from the Executive Office of the United States Attorney. He attended Iowa State University and received his law degree from Michigan Law School, where he was the editor of the Michigan Law Review. We want to welcome you, Ambassador C. Dibaka.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Karen, and thank you, everyone, for joining us online today. I'm pleased to join everyone over the Internet. I appreciate the opportunity to kick off today's discussion of best practices to combat human trafficking in disastrous zones, and I'm delighted to partner with our friends at Harvard again. Thanks, Karen McLaughlin, for moderating the discussion, and to Jean-Robert Cadet, a true hero for so many of us in the anti-trafficking movement, for participating in this important web chat. In a while, you'll also be hearing from my office from Dr. Jane Sigmon, my Senior Coordinator for International Programs, and Casey Branchini, a grants assistant in my office, who recently returned from the Dominican Republic and Haiti. They'll be participating in the panel discussion later. From cyclones and floods in southern Africa to the earthquake in Haiti, the last year has seen a multitude of natural disasters that increased both physical and economic insecurity. We feel that these disasters disproportionately impacted the most vulnerable sectors of society, whether that's migrants, job seekers, or poor families. It made them primary targets for exploitation and enslavement. Here at the Department's Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking, we do a lot of things. We create a diagnostic report that gives a snapshot of modern slavery around the world. We provide programmatic funding to prevent instances of trafficking and protect victims. And we also work with international partners to lower the rate of exploitation in the wake of natural disasters. And so the U.S. government's work on relief and redevelopment in Haiti necessarily included human trafficking and slavery issues over the last few months. When instability shakes governments, communities, and societies, there is, of course, an increased likelihood of exploitation. And sadly, especially in Haiti. As many of you may know, Haiti was ranked as a special case in past annual trafficking in persons reports. This means that the government efforts could not be ranked because of the on-the-ground circumstances being so bad and the government dysfunction there in Haiti. And things have just gotten worse since the earthquake. Before the earthquake, we were working with local partners, and since then we continue to work with them, especially with regards to the enslavement of children and domestic servants, as some of them are known, restivics. Under the restivic system, poor, mostly rural families often send their children to cities to live with wealthier families, who they think will provide the children with food, shelter, and an education in exchange for a little bit of work. But sadly, the parents' dream is often a nightmare for these children. The majority of trafficking cases are found among these 225,000 or so restivics. 65% of the victims are girls between the ages of 6 and 14. They work excessive hours, receive little or no schooling, are unpaid, and are often physically and sexually abused. Haitian labor laws require employers to pay domestic workers over the age of 15. So not surprisingly, a lot of host families dismiss the restivics just before they turn 15. As a result, dismissed and runaway restivics make up a significant proportion of the large population of street children in Haiti. They're easy prey for gangs who trap them in prostitution or in petty crime. As we've seen in Haiti and other parts of the world during times of crisis, every minute counts. And so we've preliminarily identified 6 key lessons from the past 4 months. First, counter-trafficking interventions should be included in contingency planning and must start in the emergency phase of disaster response. While human trafficking generally doesn't increase in the immediate days and weeks after a disaster, proper planning in the immediate term helps reduce the numbers of gaps that traffickers can later exploit when the emergency phase has passed. 2, definitions matter. The international community, both on the ground and back at headquarters, must operate in a coordinated way that follows the letter and the spirit of the United Nations Trafficking in Persons Protocol. The key question under the Palermo Protocol is not whether somebody has been moved, it's whether they're in compelled service, whether that's termed enslavement, involuntary servitude, debt bondage, sex trafficking, forced labor, or practices similar to slavery. All of these euphemisms come down to one thing: modern slavery. Focusing on movement instead of exploitation results in misdeployment of counter-trafficking resources to border areas, thereby compromising interior enforcement or resulting in confusion over practices such as adoption. This often undercuts local organizations' pre-disaster anti-slavery efforts. In Haiti, those local efforts were often focused on restivics and interior protections, but in the wake of the earthquake, new working groups brought different assumptions. 3, institutional support is the key to sustainability. Efforts should be made to support government institutions that play a role in effective anti-trafficking responses, including those responsible for social welfare, education, child protection, and the judiciary. International efforts should be focused on supporting the government in playing the predominant role, avoiding fostering dependence upon the international community, and they must be well coordinated to leverage resources and avoid duplication of efforts. But an overlay is needed so that core functions may be carried out. It should mirror existing structures and make room for improvements. 4th, engagement of local stakeholders and consideration of cultural factors are essential. Sustainable anti-trafficking interventions depend on the robust engagement of civil society and government. They also should take into account cultural factors such as practices surrounding child custody. In many areas, this requires a concerted effort to build the capacity of civil society, including NGOs, schools, civic associations, and community leaders, to identify the needs of the community, to plan effective interventions, and to obtain the necessary support for their implementation. 5th, trafficking interventions should pay particular attention to the most vulnerable sectors of the population. Efforts should be made to rapidly identify, register, and provide interim care for separated and unaccompanied children while family tracing is done. Efforts to prevent exploitation should be undertaken for displaced and migrating workers, whether in their own country or seeking employment opportunities in nearby countries. special care should be taken to protect women and girls from gender-based violence, particularly in spontaneous settlements or official displaced persons camps. And finally, sixth, governments should assess the vulnerabilities that exist and ensure that policies, legislative tools, and social norms are adequate to respond to the tragedy. Education campaigns to warn populations about the potential for human trafficking and how to inform them about how to receive help are very important. Codes of conduct should be promulgated within rebuilding efforts and economic recovery plans, including job creation for rubble or debris removal, recovery and burial of the dead, construction, microenterprise. Inadequate legislation or government policies to address human trafficking should be strengthened or created, such as by adopting modern anti-slavery laws. As the world looks to help Haiti build back better, we're taking strategic efforts to ensure that future generations of Haitians are allowed to live freely. And there is hope. Let me take a minute to share an email with you sent by one of our NGO partners in Haiti. And I'll quote, "Our team of child protection officers found a 5-year-old girl walking alone on the street. Despite efforts by our team to softly ask her questions, she was too nervous to speak. Concerned for the young girl's safety, our child protection officers got her to the closest interim care facility provided by Catholic Relief Services and announced a description of her on the local radio. Fortunately, not long after the call, her mother and father found her at the center. Our teams were ecstatic that they were able to reunify with her family and are very motivated to continue their work." I repeat this for you because this is truly a success story, an unaccompanied child reunited with her family, not scooped up by traffickers and used as a child slave. But there are still so many Haitians that continue to be at risk of trafficking and exploitation. There are more success stories yet to be realized. We stand ready to support our NGO partners, to work with the government of Haiti as it moves a new anti-trafficking law through Parliament, and to work with Haiti to achieve structures that will fight this heinous practice. We stand with them because partnerships are how we can achieve this goal. We bring you to the table because partnerships, like with Harvard, like with the academic world, like with the NGOs on the ground, are how we will fight this fight. We cannot do this alone. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Sidibaka. We are very pleased that you were able to join us today. And I know other people are from your office, and I want to take a moment before we transition to the next speaker to just tell the audience that it is possible, and we welcome any questions, and people can start sending in your questions at any time. Please don't wait for the question and answer period. I also want to reiterate for anybody who is joining us now that we are addressing issues relating to human trafficking in disaster zones as a result of the issues that have come up because of Haiti, but we're also welcoming any questions, and we'll also address general issues involving disaster and mass catastrophe areas and human trafficking. With all that being said, I want to encourage you all to send in your questions, and feel free to pose them to whoever you'd like to in terms of one or more of our speakers. I want to welcome Jean-Robert Cadet, our author of The Restivics, Haitian Slave Child to Middle-Class American, which was published in 1998. He's really one of the major people who's determined to draw the world's attention to the plight of the Restivic children, and he was once a Restivic himself. As a graduate of the University of Cincinnati, he created a foundation to advocate on behalf of Haitian children. He raised awareness of the Restivic issue by sharing his story, speaking at colleges and universities across the United States. Today, his book is used in numerous American universities, and that is for coursework in African American studies, anthropology, Caribbean history, and social justice. He's addressed a wide range of audiences, such as the United Nations in Geneva, Switzerland, and New York. He's also addressed UNICEF, the State Department, the U.S. Senate, Amnesty International, the United Nations Working Group on Contemporary Forms of Slavery, and a multitude of universities, churches, book clubs in the United States and throughout other parts of the world. We want to welcome him in joining us as one of the true heroes, as Ambassador Tabaka has mentioned. Jean Robert, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And I'm very grateful that you are sponsoring this to bring more attention to the plight of those of children in virtual slavery in Haiti. They call them restaurant, and the word means to stay with, which means that those kids stay with the families, but they're never part of the families. Child trafficking is a big part of what Haiti is, because Haiti is more than 200 years old, and the restaurant system is as old as Haiti. It's been in existence since independence. The root cause of it is extreme poverty, because most of those children, they came from the countryside, and they are trafficked to the cities for the purpose of fetching water, walking other children to school, and these children themselves, they are denied education. The promise of an education often never kept. So as a result, you have a high rate of illiteracy in Haiti, and the rest of the system is basically responsible for most of the major ills that keep Haiti from achieving democracy, from achieving economic development, crimes. It is one of the key issues, I think, that keeps Haiti from progressing. After the earthquake, I was in Haiti. Actually, the day after the earthquake, I was in Haiti trying to monitor the traffic of these kids to find out if they were in camps. And what I found was alarming. Again, most of those children happen to be little girls between the age of 5 to 17, 18 years old. In the camps, they were being used to fetch water, to empty out chamber pots, to do the laundry, to do everything that the host family is required of them. The sad part is kids cannot say no, and in the camps they are not allowed to participate in psychosocial programs designed to help children cope with the trauma of the earthquake. This is something that must be addressed. It's something that the international community should address, and then there's a solution for that. I think the best practice to eliminate the system is for Haiti to decentralize, to be able to provide school in the countryside, and also so those children, so the countryside people would have a place to send their children. There must be some type of job creation, and then above all, there must be awareness, both in the rural areas and also in the countryside. Parents should know, parent in the countryside should be educated enough to know that once they give their children to a stranger going to the cities, these children will become domestic slaves. And then the people in the awareness should be raised in Port-au-Prince to educate people about what the rest of the system is doing to Haiti as a whole. And if there are questions, I'll be glad to answer some of your questions.
And Jean Robert, we're going to take questions at the end of our sessions, but I was hoping that you may clarify a couple of questions that are already posed, which seem pretty primary in terms of our discussions today. The first one is, are restivics in Haiti considered human trafficking victims? This has been posed by someone in our audience, and I felt it was such a threshold question that will also dovetail quite nicely on the next speakers and also Jane from the State Department. So,
well, anytime a child is moved from one area of the country to another for the purpose of being slaves, it is child trafficking. As I mentioned earlier, it is a major part of Haitian custom to be able to take children from the countryside, bringing them to the cities to work as domestic slaves. And it doesn't stop there. A lot of people, Haitians moving to the United States, to Canada, even to the Bahamas, find ways to traffic children, to take them from Haiti all the way to these countries. Myself is an example of that. I was probably one of the first child trafficked from Haiti to New York, where I continue to serve as an unpaid domestic. I was a slave in New York. And once the owner discovered that it was against the law to keep me at home, they sent me to school, because there are laws in the United States that said you can't keep a minor out of school. But since I was no longer useful to them in school, the housework was not being done, I was kicked out into the streets to fend for myself. And this situation is happening. My situation is still happening today. It's happening in Canada, where a few years ago I intervened on behalf of a child. I demand that the Canadian government give her political asylum. Otherwise, she would have been returned. They would have returned her to Haiti and dropped off in the street, where her life would have been in peril. The same situation is happening in the Bahamas. In the United States, people have been caught trafficking children from Haiti, and some of them are in jail in the United States because of trafficking. So Haitian children are still being trafficked, and the biggest part of the trafficking is happening in Haiti. In the camp after the earthquake, the situation of child trafficking has gotten a lot worse, because organizations that are paying grassroots organizations to care for displaced children, to care for children, orphan children, are actually going to the countryside to take children from the countryside to bring into the camps, so to show whoever is paying to keep the children that they have a large number of children. So this is a big problem. I think the earthquake has increased the potential for children to be trafficked.
And this dovetails quite nicely for our next question, which is the populations of the camps presently, and what are the psychological consequences of the Restavik population, and what's happening with the camps presently?
Well, in the camps right now, there are camp directors. They call them psychosocial program directors, employed by different organizations to include to create psychosocial programs to help children cope with the trauma of the earthquake. Unfortunately, a lot of these directors are so desensitized to the point that they don't even recognize Restavik children, even when they're walking right across the classroom with a 5-gallon bucket on their head. So if you can see in this picture, I've spent 3 days working with the camp directors to teach them how to identify restored children, how to advocate on behalf of his children, and how to approach the people who actually own them to demand that these children come to the program to participate in activities that they could benefit from.
Great. And the last question that we've received while we've been online here is, are the child victims found that are restivics being sheltered in place? What are the options for them? What's happening in terms of the criminal acts involving domestic servitude? So we have a range of things for you. You've sparked quite a list of questions.
Well, one of the situations that I was involved in, for example, someone had called the police to get a woman arrested, and the woman had been abusing this 12-year-old restorac that she owned, and the police took the woman and the child both into custody, but they released the woman. They kept the child in jail, and the police demanded that the woman found the biological parent of that child, because according to the law, a child who is in domestic servitude, even if the child is being abused, the child must be returned to the biological father. Well, I went to the police to intervene on behalf of that child. I wanted to remove this child in order to find a foster family for this particular child. But the police released the child, to the father, and the father handed the child back to the owner because there are no laws in Haiti to act on. There are no laws that to protect children. The state, I don't think the state does anything in the best interest of children, particularly when the children are restored. The only thing I think I've seen that the Department of Social Affairs does is that when a child in servitude, especially often a little girl, they escape from abuse, the child is given to a grassroots organization, and the grassroots organization is responsible to take the child, to locate the biological parent of the child, to take the child back. I've been involved in that several times, and where I took children back, and I asked the child to show her back to the community, to show the scars. And this was one of the most positive experiences I've had with the community when I asked them, will you send your child into domestic servitude in the cities? They just took one look at the child's back, and then they say no. So the Haitian government must be forced to take ownership of that problem, to eliminate the system, because it is one of the systems that perpetuates all the social ills that Haiti is having right now.
Thank you very much. Hello, Jean Robert. Thank you so much for your remarks and being so willing to take our first questions. I wanted to introduce the rest of the panel, and we are still awaiting Susan Forbes Martin to join us. So I wanted to introduce the rest of the State Department. And first we have Casey Branchini. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Casey, who serves as a grant assistant in the United States Department of State, the Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons. We also have Jane Sigmon, who is here with us. Jane Nady Sigmon has a Ph.D. and serves as the Senior Coordinator for International Programs in the United States Department of State and the Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons, which we'll call the GTIP office. She's responsible for managing grant programs to combat human trafficking worldwide. And she joined the department in 2000 as the agency's first victim assistance specialist in the Bureau of Consular Affairs, Office of Overseas Citizen Services. She's the former director for the Office for Victims of Crime, which is part of the United States Justice Department Office for Justice Programs. And she has 10 years of experience working with children and families in public health and school settings. So I want to ask Jane and Casey to talk to us today about what is also happening in Haiti. We do have some questions that we wanted to pose, but we also wanted to give you both an opportunity to respond to anything that Jean Robert had also mentioned. The first question that we thought was an important threshold question again was, what are we seeing in terms of the restivic population? What is the scale of the problem? How many children are restivics? And how are they treated differently from the host family than the biological children of the host family? If you could just give us some background in that area.
Well, a restivic child is often isolated from family activities. They live mostly in total isolation. Can you hear me? Hello?
I think, excuse me, this is Jim Cooney. I think we had a miscommunication there. We're directing the question towards
the State Department representatives. I don't know if everyone can hear me. This is Karen McLaughlin, the moderator. We were hoping to just switch gears and ask the State Department representatives if they would respond to those questions. I don't know if Jane and Casey could hear those questions.
Okay. Do you want me to repeat what I had just said?
I think, no, Jean Robert, we're posing some questions to the State Department representatives.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
No problem. I think there might have been a time where you couldn't hear what we were saying at the beginning of our questions. So yes. I welcome Jane and Casey to respond in any way to the general questions that I posed.
Okay, great. So can I go ahead?
Go right ahead.
Okay, this is Casey Branchini again. As I was saying, in 2009, the Pan American Development Foundation conducted a study on the plight of Haiti's restivic children.
Hello?
Hello?
I think I've lost you.
Hello?
Casey, you can just keep going, and Jean Robert, I'll chat with you behind the scenes just to make sure you're still connected.
Okay. Well, I am connected, but I keep fading back, off and on.
Okay.
Okay. Well, let's pick it up via instant message chat. I'm going to chat you in a moment, but Casey, please continue with your answer. I'm sorry.
Okay, great. The study found that in urban areas, 225,000 children are restivics, with 2/3 of this group composed of girls. Overall, 30% of survey households had restivic children present. And then to respond to the second part of your question, how are children being treated differently?
Yes, if you could just expand a little bit in terms of what happens in the host family household. How are those children treated differently than the biological children of the host family?
First of all, I just want to start off and say that Jean Cadet gave an excellent description of the life of a restivic child, but I'll just provide a little bit more of what I learned from being in Haiti. In general, restivic children are expected to do new...
Casey, I'm going to interrupt you one more time. I'm sorry, this is Jim Cooney. Different problem now. We have a few people who are actually having trouble hearing you, so if you could either get closer to your microphone or if you're using a speakerphone, perhaps pick up the handset.
Okay, yeah, I'm actually on the handset.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, then, in that case, I'll just have to ask the audience to bear with it.
Is this any better?
Yes, that's much better.
Oh, okay, great. This is actually a speakerphone.
Go figure. All right, yeah, let's try that. Thank you.
Okay, great. In general, rest-of-act children are expected to do nearly twice as much work as children born to the household and are subject to physical and mental abuse. Rest-of-act children generally receive inferior food and clothing compared to other children in the home, and they sleep on the floor rather than in a bed. They receive no time out for play and must use informal terms when speaking to social superiors. This includes most other household members. In general, they're easily recognized on the streets by their torn clothing and rags and their bruised and feeble bodies. They generally do not attend school, and if they do, it's most likely in the afternoon, evening hours when all the chores are done.
Thank you. We're also receiving additional questions, and some others to pose are, what kind of kinship ties protect children from rest-evict treatment or status? What other protections might they have, and should they escape, what may happen?
That's an excellent question. This is Jane Sigmon, and I'm going to start, and I expect that Jean-Robert Cadet may have some additional comments on this. From reports and experience that we have seen, what we would expect is kinship ties, which in other countries are often used as a placement, a safe place for children who can't be with their families. And they're used often as a foster care alternative, for example, in the United States. We find that the situation is really quite different in Haiti. A significant percentage of rest-evict children are with extended family members, and they are treated not as the same as family members or treated in the same way that other children in the family are treated, as we've been saying. So it does not provide that added layer of protection, and in fact can constitute these families engage in the abuse as well. When children run away, as Jean-Robert Cadet mentioned, they often are returned to families, but the family, their biological families, their moms and dads, often don't know what kind of abuse is taking place. I think that they tend to believe that in fact their children are receiving a better life than they could offer them, and that's why they go to either other family members or families that are not related to them, but offer the opportunity for children to come into the more urban setting than the child grew up. When children are returned, when they're disobedient and they run away, they're returned and often to the family that, as Jean Cadet said, owns them. And it's this ownership that, in fact, is part of what constitutes the slavery that these children suffer.
And I wonder, Jane, if you might also give us the landscape, a little bit of context. I know the State Department has been working in Haiti before the crisis occurred with the earthquake, and I wondered if you could say a few words about what your office, in particular your grants program and other responsibilities that you have, so our audience that is really wondering what's happening in areas relating to disaster zones, but also may want to know generically what it is that the State Department's doing in other countries. So could you, I know this is a large, you could talk about this for a while, but could you spend a little time addressing what your office is doing and what it's done in Haiti before the earthquake?
Thank you. We have an appropriation from Congress to provide foreign assistance to countries that are not doing well in terms of the governmental response to trafficking in persons. We focus our foreign assistance primarily on countries that are rated as Tier 3, Tier 2 watch list, and many Tier 2 countries that don't have a good legal framework for addressing trafficking, which means they don't criminalize all forms of trafficking, They don't have good protection systems for victims, and they're not prosecuting traffickers effectively and using that powerful tool of the criminal justice system to deter trafficking from happening. So we have, as I said, about $20 million a year that we manage. We currently have programs in, it's a little around 60 countries, about $55 million around the world in programs to combat human trafficking. Haiti, as Ambassador Sidibaka mentioned, was not ranked in the 2009 TIP report. It was considered a special case because of the situation of the government not being able to respond adequately to this issue and others. So our office has focused foreign assistance on Haiti prior to the earthquake, and we redirected some funds in the immediate aftermath. The kind of work we've been doing over the last few years, working with the International Organization on Migration, which has done a terrific job in so many countries, helping to raise awareness about what trafficking is and helping to advance the understanding of government officials and NGOs about what trafficking is. They have been working to provide direct services and enhance the capacity of some of the NGOs in Haiti. My colleague Casey Branchini was in Haiti and met with some of those NGOs just a few weeks ago. One of the NGOs that we're funding directly is an organization called Jura Media, which is a local organization in Haiti, and our office was supporting them. We had actually just begun to provide them with assistance just before the earthquake hit. Their job is, they are focusing on domestic child labor and child rights and raising awareness of the issue of restivics and trying to advance the dialogue and the protection services for children. We provided also support to an organization called Anti-Slavery International, which also operates under the name of Free the Slaves, and they've also been working on locally based service models that will engage communities to really target issues around domestic servitude and increase economic alternatives and psychological support for victims of trafficking. Another project that we provided shortly after the earthquake, was a massive destruction, and the government institutions were terribly, negatively affected. We provided some support to an organization called Heartland Alliance for Human Needs and Human Rights, which operates out of Chicago, and it's an organization that operates in several countries, and they were working to improve the capacity of the Child Protection Brigade, which is part of the Haitian National Police, to identify children at risk on the borders and in the interior. That particular agency was devastated, like many, after the quake, and building their capacity is one of the key components of assisting the government of Haiti to be able to identify and respond more effectively to trafficking victims in Haiti. So Haiti has been a target of our funding as we've tried to assist in that very complex environment prior to the earthquake. And at this time, we have about $1 million in programs there. As you probably know, and many of the people on this call know, the Congress is currently discussing a supplemental appropriation that would possibly, if enacted, enable us to expand our support there.
And Jane, I know you probably have a list of priorities for where that might go, but is there a general sense of where that additional money might go in terms of the types of services or the types of NGOs that may be working with you in terms of expansion?
Well, it would be premature to itemize priorities, but I think as we look at the government's response, the U.S. government response to Haiti, it's clear that we're working to assist to rebuild the government institutions and the key social service agencies that provide assistance. The Institute for Social Welfare and Research, IBERS, which has responsibility for social services, and as I said, the Child Protection Brigade. Those are two agencies that have a key role. They certainly are working cooperatively with UNICEF, and we want to be able to support their expanded, enhanced ability in this recovery to identify and respond to the needs of trafficking victims. And of course, we're very interested in doing what we can to assist the government to enact comprehensive trafficking in persons statute, which criminalizes all forms of human trafficking. And finally, I want to say there are international organizations and there are local organizations in Haiti that were working on human trafficking prior to the earthquake. And so I think our office is, just as we have been in the immediate aftermath, working with international organizations and local organizations and the government institutions. I think that would be, those would be themes, but we're waiting for to see what the Congress wants and directs, and with regard to any foreign assistance, and we would look first to that direction before we would move forward.
Great, thank you for that response. And early in your response, Jane, you mentioned the TIP report and also the tier system, and I wondered if you might clarify for audience members that may not be very familiar with what those minimum standards are. And I know you raised working on the tier issues in countries. So could you just let people know what you're saying in terms of the ranking? What is the ranking system, just very succinctly?
All right, very succinctly, the Trafficking in Persons report is mandated by the Congress, the Trafficking Victim Protection Act, and I would suggest to listeners that they go to the State Department website, which is www.state.gov/G/TIP for the Trafficking in Persons topic, and that is the website of our office, and can read about the tier rankings. The tiers are based on a government's efforts to implement the 3P approach to eliminating human trafficking. That's prosecution of traffickers, protection of victims, and prevention. A tier 1 is a country that is meeting the minimum standards related to those three areas, and a tier 3 is assigned to countries that have not that have been assessed to not meeting the minimum standards, and they include generally whether the country criminalizes all forms of trafficking in persons, whether the country punishes sex trafficking at a level that's commensurate with rape, punishes all forms of trafficking sufficiently severely to deter it, and conducts serious and sustained efforts in law enforcement, victim protection, and prevention. The minimum standards are spelled out in the Trafficking Victims Protection Act as amended, and we have our guidance from the Congress, and this office implements that the requirement for the annual Trafficking in Persons report. And it is not just an assessment of countries' activities to combat trafficking. We also use it here as a diagnostic tool and a method of engaging with countries to discuss how it is that they're approaching this problem, and also how our foreign assistance can be targeted to assist them to improve their response. So we kind of use it as a diagnostic tool, and we develop our priorities in relation to the findings of the annual TIP report each year.
Sharing with our audience the TIP report online. If people have the visuals up, they can see the Secretary's picture and the photograph of the TIP report itself and the various components of it. Thank you so much, Jane, for giving us a really good outline of what is the TIP report, what are the rankings, and what you use that for in terms of the diagnostic issues. At this moment, we wanted to welcome aboard our speaker who has yet to be introduced, Susan Forbes Martin. She holds the Donald G. Herzberg Chair in International Migration and serves as the director of the Institute for the Studies of International Migration in the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. Previously, Dr. Martin served as the executive director of the U.S. Commission on Immigration Reform. sort of a hot-button issue, Susan. Establish legislation to advise Congress and the President on U.S. immigration and refugee policy, and the Director of Research and Programs at the Refugee Policy Group. Her recent publications include Women, Migration, and Conflict, Breaking a Deadly Cycle, Mexico-U.S. Migration Management, a Binational Approach, and Managing Migration, the Promise of Cooperation Beyond the Gateway, Immigrants in a Changing America. I want to welcome her and thank you for waiting patiently. We are happy to have you, and you also have the floor, Susan.
Thank you very much, and I'm sorry to have been joining you midway through the webinar. I just came out of another meeting and giving a presentation on another type of crisis in terms of humanitarian emergencies. But what I want to do today is talk a bit about the ways in which research has shown there to be a linkage between disasters and human trafficking. The photos that are shown on the screen right now are ones that mostly relate to conflict, but also to natural hazards that create disasters. I was reminded actually by Eric Schwartz, the Assistant Secretary in the Bureau for Population, Refugees, and Migration last week when I talked about natural disasters, that there is no such thing as a natural disaster. There are natural hazards such as hurricanes or earthquakes or tsunamis, cyclones, but they only become disasters when there's a human element to it, when there's a breakdown of law and order, breakdown of governance, often due to conflict or political instability. The kind of decades of political instability that we certainly saw in Haiti that created an environment in which a natural hazard is much more difficult to deal with than in a wealthier, more stable country with a lot greater capabilities. Chile, as you know, had an earthquake that was of even higher magnitude that had much less of a disaster than occurred in Haiti. In terms of going through the issues that arise in terms of natural disasters, first I'd like to talk about some of the more vulnerable groups to trafficking. Those who are rendered homeless and displaced as a result of natural disasters or hazards that create natural disasters, as well as conflict, who are located in camps. Often these are very tenuous themselves. Again, we've seen in Haiti that many of the encampments in which people are living are now pretty dire in terms of the living conditions and the problems that they're experiencing. Sometimes even more vulnerable are those that are spontaneously settled in urban areas or in rural areas where there's no external assistance. There's no one that's really able to provide help to those individuals. Widows, women heads of households who are not only having to deal with their own situation, but that of their families may be particularly vulnerable as well in these situations. Adolescents are always a difficult population in the context of humanitarian emergencies. They're ripe for recruitment by military, for recruitment by gangs and bandits. Separated and unaccompanied children of all ages, and particularly children who are without parents who are responsible for caring for their own children. These are all groups that are particularly vulnerable at all times, the best of times, but in the context of disasters are in or even in greater difficulty. So what type of trafficking occurs out of these situations? Often it's trafficking for forced labor. Sometimes what we see in terms of even the needs for reconstruction and recovery and the kind of labor that's necessary in order to rebuild can turn into, from a very positive way in which people can earn a livelihood and can help rebuild their own lives, into a forced labor situation where the most vulnerable are forced or deceived into working in gangs in order to help with the recovery effort. Domestic servitude, again, is another type of trafficking. We know about sexual exploitation and abuse. And in the context of humanitarian emergencies and conflict situations, often there's trafficking into combat itself, into gang violence, into the kind of banditry that I mentioned before. There are many reasons that these groups become more vulnerable in the context of disasters than they might be at other times. Disasters usually lead to a breakdown in law and order for shorter or longer periods of time, depending on how long it takes for systems of the police to recover, the courts to recover. With displacement, there's often a breakdown in family structures, where people who have lived in intact families, often in extended families with communities that were well known to them, end up, because of the displacement, now being in a very isolated situation. They may be living in a camp with thousands of other people, but not necessarily with members of their families or members with their original community. The inadequate assistance that often accompanies disasters, assistance in terms of food, clothing, shelter, health care, can render people vulnerable, because if there is no alternative and the only thing that one is thinking about is how to feed my family for the next week, those who would prey on those individuals, the traffickers, can find an easier route. In societies where there's already gender discrimination and gender inequality, and where some of the systems that may help young girls remain in relatively secure environments, particularly in an educational environment, when those break down, that can lead to vulnerability. And particularly where there is already a tolerance for gender-based violence, in situations of humanitarian crises, when mores have broken down, when there is no law and order, then that gender-based violence can become extreme to the point of allowing traffickers pretty much free access. And then finally, there are often very weak systems of accountability that mean that traffickers can operate in pretty much impunity. So the frameworks for addressing trafficking in disaster contexts are similar to those in any other situation in which vulnerable populations may be targets of trafficking. We still need prevention, prosecution, and protection. Prevention often means providing adequate humanitarian assistance, food, clothing, shelter, nutrition, systems for protecting, particularly those who are displaced, homeless, without family protections, and providing livelihoods for women and children who are affected by disasters so they don't have to resort to prostitution or sexual exploitation in order to be able to gain basic aid. Strong codes of conduct in delivery of aid, these have been developed over the last decade, mostly in response to sexual exploitation by humanitarian aid workers of those who have been displaced or affected by crises. It's essential to ensure that these codes of conduct also include provisions with regard to trafficking, and that there's the training and the systems of accountability to make sure that the humanitarian aid works to protect people and not to increase their vulnerability. Prosecution Again, fairly standard, but adding to the need for statutes, penalties, prosecution of traffickers, not trafficking victims, prosecution of corrupt officials, means also having penalties against aid workers and agencies that engage in sexual exploitation, because that process can very easily lead to an environment in which trafficking can occur. And then finally, the need for better protection of trafficking survivors, protection against retaliation, help for integration or reintegration of the trafficking victims into communities, again, difficult in the context of disasters where reconstruction is a problem more generally, reconstructing, reintegrating trafficking victims in those environments can present a challenge. And then things like reproductive health, psychosocial programs, livelihood programs to address the aftermath of trafficking. So many of the prescriptions are quite similar in disaster situations, but there are special problems, special vulnerabilities people have in the context of disaster. And it's really those specific issues that need to get a lot more attention in the context of situations not only like Haiti, but ones where either natural hazards or conflict or human rights abuses create large-scale disasters that increase vulnerability to trafficking as well as other problems. I'll end there.
Thank you so much, Susan. In terms of your description of codes of conduct, I was wondering if you could make mention of a few of the content areas that may be included in those codes of conduct, and if you have a reference for people who are looking for sample codes or any natural disaster where it may have been the code was written and changed over time because of specific disasters or other humanitarian issues. Could you just address a little more of the specifics in that area, please?
Sure. A good starting point are the SPHERE standards. They're a set of minimal standards for operating in any humanitarian emergency that are primarily focused on sectors like health, food, shelter, logistics, camp management, issues that arise in both man-made and natural hazard disasters. And the SPHERE standards start with a code of conduct, and it's a code of conduct that attempts to establish basic humanitarian principles. And those principles are that humanitarian aid must be independent, it must be based on need, and be impartial in terms of the way in which it's disseminated. And that humanitarian aid organizations must be neutral, particularly in the context of conflicts. They can't take sides. They have to really make sure that the aid that they provide is based on need. And this is a really important point in the context of places like Haiti, where it's very important that the aid that's being provided is consistent with international standards, provides the nutritional value if we're talking about food, is organized in terms of providing health, reproductive health, other services that are needed and are based on need, not based on what group you belong to or what your political party affiliations are or which side of the conflict or the government you support. As long as we can have aid that is impartial in terms of being based on need, it will in and of itself reach the people who will be most vulnerable to trafficking.
Thank you, Susan. And I know afterwards when we have this webcast archived, we'll also be getting from you your other resources that you might like to post so people can avail themselves of codes of conduct or other things that you've referenced. Thank you so much for that very interesting and very compelling presentation. At this time in the broadcast, I want to remind people that we are taking questions. We're also fielding questions out to people, but of course, we're also wondering if the panel members would like to query each other to pose any questions to each other or make comments. We are in a more free-ranging part of the discussion at this moment and would entertain any questions that people might have of each other's based on people's presentations. I also wanted to ask Jean Robert if you can still hear us, Jean Robert.
Yes.
Yes, and how is your technical problems? Are they pretty much cleared up?
Yeah, they've been solved.
Great. Okay. Well, I'm delighted. I think everybody's given us a lot of food for thought. The one question that keeps coming up is in terms of estimates, and I think we've already said that there is approximately 300,000 restavek children. I know there was a new UNICEF report, maybe with slightly higher numbers, but I don't know if anybody wanted to address that at the very outset to give people a sense of the scope. And it could be someone from the State Department or Jean Robert, whatever you'd like.
Well, I think the number is much more than 300,000 because, you know, I walk the streets of Port-au-Prince a lot, and I ask taxi drivers, hairdressers, even people selling in the streets, you know, to taxi drivers, you know, in just casual conversation, you ask them about their families, and they would tell you, and then you say, well, who's helping you? You know, if you're working and your wife is working or selling in the street, who's helping you? And they always said they have a timun, and a timun is a code word for restavek. That means a little person helping in the house. Even police officers do have these children. So I would say the number is much, much higher. And you have to understand that the restavek situation is very complex. I have seen grandmothers enslaving, using granddaughters as a slave child because the child happened to be born out of wedlock. So you have all these situations that enters the mix, and that increases tremendously. Increases the number of restavek. I think it's much more than 300, probably around 500,000 children in servitude in Haiti.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I wanted to take this moment to tell people that Jim has been assisting us in conducting a poll of participants. So if you see that on your screen and you're caring to respond, we'd be very grateful to you for responding to us in the questions we're posing, but there's no obligation whatsoever. We also have a question, Jean Robert, about how many victims or approximate numbers that we might have with the restavek population might also be sexually abused, and what kind of programs might be available for working with young girls, also any young boys, relative to sexual abuse?
Well, I would say most restavek children, especially girls, are victims of sexual abuse. Many, I don't know if you've seen this piece on 60 Minutes about a couple months ago where a 13-year-old girl was pregnant and she was a restavek. And often when these girls reach puberty, they become vulnerable to sexual abuse, and boys are not excluded in that category. As far as programs concerned, I think there was one program in Cité Soleil that was developed by an organization in Switzerland called Terre des Hommes, working on that issue, but there aren't that many that I'm aware of.
Karen,
yes,
this is Jane Sigmon with the State Department, and we really appreciate Jean-Robert Cadet's participation in this call, and we agree that absolutely restavek children do not enjoy protections from the families that they're with. They don't enjoy the nurturing that is so important for the growth and development of a child. And sexual abuse, we know, is a problem. We don't really have good information about the extent of it that is based on research, but we have much anecdotal information about that. And at this time, I think this is a piece of the assistance process which needs more attention in order to build up a good response to, one, identify children, enable them to be in a safe place, and to receive psychosocial, educational, medical assistance that's appropriate to their needs.
Great. Thank you, Jane. We have a new question that just came in, and it said, it sounds like this is an issue of that you wouldn't remedy by providing exclusively only jobs, for example, or schools in rural areas, but it's really a cultural mindset. How do we begin to change that cultural mindset? This is from Amy Mahoney, who is wondering about those social norms. I would guess that anybody could respond to this question.
Well, one of the things that I've been doing for the past 3 or 4 years to change that mindset, you have to understand that, first of all, I'm Haitian, I know the culture, and I don't depend on translators to do that type of work. One of the things to do that I've been doing, and I think it's most effective, is to address large church groups, especially Sunday mornings in those mega churches with anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 people. And then you address the issue, and then, of course, since most Haitians are very religious people, so you let them know that, and they will tell you that if you ask them, why do you have so many children, they'll say, well, God gave them to me. And then you use that opportunity to let them know that, well, God also sent this child who happens to be staying with you. God sent you this child for you to take care of this child. And that way you begin to, with the help of the church pastors, you can start changing the mentality of these children. Another thing that I've done is going to the radio station, popular radio station, and speak on the issue and share my story with them. And one of the biggest issue, I think, one of the biggest ways I think to really make a dent on this is to introduce a new curriculum at the school, elementary school, junior high school, to be able to change the mentality of the next generation, of the new generation, in order to change the mentality of the country. And this is something that I plan to do in the next 6 months or so to change that society.
Great. Jean-Robert, I thank you for that. And should you want to post any of those materials on the website, or they might be useful for others working on social norms, education, especially of young children, we'd like to be able to post that in addition to affording it to other people who might work on the same arena. We're also receiving questions about prosecution. Oh, Jane, did you want to say something?
This is actually Casey Branchini from Haiti.
Casey. Yes, go right ahead.
I just wanted to share an experience from when I was in Haiti. One of our grantees is working with the local NGO called COFAVIV, and they're holding these awareness group meetings with women who have been victimized by sexual violence, physical violence, and they're using education as a conversation. And it's a type of workshop, story planning that helps women become sensitized to the issue of restavek and the abuse of children. And they've had great success with this, especially in building the collective responsibility within a community. Many of the women talked about how after they went through these trainings, they were able to stand up to their neighbors and say, you cannot treat your child this way. And then women in their community were also backing them with after having all this training. And they're trying to bring this into the IDP camps because it is such a close-knit area and there's so many people around, really trying to build that collective responsibility and shame. And they've had great success with it.
This is another thing. The notion of going to churches and changing the mindset. The study that the Pan American Development Foundation did suggested that there were maybe 30 to 40% of families that had rest-of-it children, which means that 50% maybe of families do not, 60%. And what I think is we target the public in public awareness activities that to also send a message that it's okay, just as Casey is describing in the project that we're supporting in Haiti, that it's all right. And in fact, we want to encourage people to speak up. And when they understand the importance of adults protecting children, when they see children that aren't connected to them, that they can speak up and say something about it.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Jean Robert?
Yes.
Do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, well, it's very important to understand that most Haitians are very desensitized to this issue. They could be walking down the street and see a child in rest-of-it servitude being abused, and they walk by. It's like the child doesn't. It's like they don't see the child. The child is invisible. You have that component playing a role that's preventing Haiti to turn the corner as far as eliminating the rest-of-it situation. It can be eliminated, but what needs to be done is constant awareness, and to empower the new generation, high school students, university students, to empower them to take ownership of that, because they're in the street, they're young, they can go to the camps, they can make a huge impact. You have to work with the new generation rather than the old people who are so desensitized to this issue.
Yeah, if I could add in, this is Susan, another target for education does need to be the humanitarian organizations and the agencies that are working on reconstruction, because many of them will be unaware of these issues and the dangers to the children. And in looking to try to get kids back with some family, could end up making things worse rather than better.
Absolutely.
This is a good opportunity to try to expand the knowledge into a lot of these new players that don't know Haiti very well. They may know humanitarian crises quite well, but not the specific context in which they're operating in Haiti.
Absolutely. Haiti has this, there's a saying, and it's a cultural thing, where whenever someone needs a child to be the rest of it, they would say, I need a child to help me. I have yet to hear a Haitian adult said, I'm looking for a child to help. These cultural saying, cultural aspects should be used in campaign against child slavery. And one of the things that I would like to see done in Haiti, which part of my plan, is to have a few billboards showing a small child, carrying a bucket of water on her head, to see a man picking up the water, an adult picking up the bucket, and then to have a caption that says, children don't help adults, adults help children. Things like that. You have to use the culture of Haiti. You have to use the language in order to do a good job addressing the rest of the system.
Yes, in different ways to address that changing cultural norm.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Susan, I wondered if you have some specific examples from your work. I know you've worked a great deal with the International Organization of Migration, the IOM, and I'm wondering if you have materials that might emphasize the training of humanitarian relief workers in post-disaster, post-conflict issues.
Yeah, this is an area where I think we're harmed by the fact that we tend to work in silos. So people who work on trafficking or on slavery issues don't necessarily have much contact with those who work on humanitarian issues, who don't have contact with people who work on development issues. And we really need to be breaking down those silos because for all of us, the issue should be protection, and particularly protection of the most vulnerable, and that's these children. And yet we don't really have the systems in place. This is an area, for example, that the IASC, the Interagency Standing Committee within the international system that works on humanitarian emergencies, should have a working group, dealing with problems of trafficking and slavery in the context of humanitarian crises. And it should be a very active part of that, their discussions on a continuing basis on protection. They are concerned about protection, and this is an area that really needs to be integrated into those discussions in a very systematic, continuing manner.
Well, you may have just established some new policy change right here in the Harvard webcast, where we try to promote with the IASC the work that's being done in this hybrid area with disaster relief and catastrophes of all kinds, and what's happening with human trafficking, a very important thing. And going back to the ambassador's remarks, to be prepared and to have that level of preparedness in countries and collectively in organizations before the catastrophe occurs. So I think, watchword number one in terms of disaster issues is always preparedness. So, it comes as no surprise that we need to urge the international organizations to do just that. So, Susan, maybe you'll help us and volunteer in the future for an initiative like that. I'd certainly love to see that be done, and would welcome a chance to work and make a contribution myself. In terms of, Jane, was that Jane or someone from state wanting to respond to that?
No, well, actually, yes, I guess. I think in addition to being prepared, as Ambassador Sidibaka just spoke at, I think this is a good time to go back and look at the importance of the interagency collaboration. And Dr. Martin bringing up the training needs of the disaster assistance folks is very, very critical. And our office is advocating for the human trafficking to be integrated into the disaster assistance, and that component which Dr. Martin mentioned is really important. And in Haiti, it's particularly important because, as in all disasters, the response has to be tailored to the situation, to the unique circumstances that are on the ground, culturally, and as we look at the issues that the country was struggling with before. How does that influence the response? So as we go forward, as he spoke about building Haiti back, the U.S. commitment is in fact for a coordinated response that in fact includes focusing in on the trafficking issue.
I wanted to just get back to a few additional questions that have come in the interim, and we have one question about prosecution and what the status of existing law is in Haiti in terms of trafficking, criminalization of trafficking. I think we briefly touched on that, and Lou mentioned a need to go and really work hard legislatively in various arenas. But does someone want to take that question on in terms of the current status of law, or where the legislation is being proposed, where it's at in terms of getting the criminalization issue dealt with?
touch on that. This is Casey Branchini. There actually have been no prosecutions in Haitian courts to date. There have been cases that relate to the abusive punishment of Rest-of-Ec children, but not because of their Rest-of-Ec status. It is unlikely that Rest-of-Ec cases are even prosecuted unless advocacy groups actively bring suit on behalf of a child. There is no comprehensive trafficking law, so it's actually a point of contention for many of the organizations trying to act to fight this issue, particularly the Haitian National Police, the Child Protection Brigade, because it's not within their mandate, so they can't bring any type of charges against these people committing crimes against children.
Yes, and I'm sure it goes without saying that the condition for child protective services in general is needing help, and I'm sure the brigade has more than it can really respond to.
The Brigade for the Protection of Minors, which is run by Commissioner Renel Costume, is funded minimally. I mean, they have very, very little money. They don't have. I think they only have one car. For the entire Port-au-Prince. They're not supported. They're not well financed. There is nothing they can do. I mean, I have called Commissioner Costume on several occasions to report cases of extremely abusive situations, and they can't respond. And if a child is taken out of a Rest-of-Ec situation, the child is given back to the biological parent, and the biological parent is so illiterate that he can't even understand what a better life is for his child, and often they return the child in servitude. And if the police is called again to that home, they ignore the call. Mm-hmm. Something has to be done about that. I think the international community must lean on Haiti, on the Haitian government. It's something that the Haitian government can do to be able to prosecute, to pass laws, to enforce these laws, to prosecute those people who are so abusive to the point where the child risks dying in many of these cases.
Yes, obviously, when the infrastructure that is in existence is completely inadequate to respond, we have a double-edged sword where victims are dying and we don't have the adequate structure to respond. So I'm sure the hope you have, Jean Robert, is to make sure that we don't leave you in this invisible zone, that this crisis will bring in an opportunity to talk about the other needs of Haiti in addition to what the disaster itself has wrought. We do have a question that I'm sure you could respond to in State Department as well about the infrastructure. This has been a question that's been pending for a while, and the disastrous consequences of the infrastructure itself, the roads, the repairs, the inability to be able to get resources in and out. Can you give us a present status of what is happening now and how that's impeding working in human trafficking and how that might impede working to rescue victims in the rest of the population? We have this question.
Well,
it's a mouthful.
Okay, no. The Department of Social Affairs and IBERS, they're responsible for the welfare of children, are basically living in tents. I was in a meeting Friday sponsored by a convention. It's called a Convention for the Congressional Coalition on Adoption. It was sponsored by Senator Mary Lendro. She was a keynote speaker. Several Haitian ministers were there, several people who were very concerned about Haiti. And one of the things that the government is saying is that they can't really function effectively until there are help with monetary, with the funds to be able to build their infrastructure. They are operating in tents, so it's very difficult for them to be active or to push for laws or to help these children. That's one of the biggest demands Friday afternoon at that conference.
I think we want to take one more question and then any communication that the speakers have with each other, and then I wanted to ask each of you to respond to what do we want the takeaway to be to our audience, to the participants who are clearly interested, and many of them have been on all the duration of this webcast. So we have one additional question, which are there any legislative provisions already in place in the Haitian government to present the problems of exploitation? To prevent the problems of exploitation.
Well, you want me to answer that?
Go right ahead.
Well, back in the, I would say, maybe late 80s, there was a law that says that no one should take a child in domestic servitude if the child is less than 12 years old. Often, West-Quebec children do not have a birth certificate, and that's the point highlighted Friday by several ministers of the Haitian government. And that's one of the key issues right now, is to have many children, especially in the countryside, to have them registered so they can go up to have a birth certificate, to issue a number for each person in Haiti. Even a lot of adults in Haiti do not have a birth certificate. I don't even know my age. I've never had a birth certificate. I was smuggled in the United States with fake papers. And until these problems are resolved, it's pretty hard to make a dent. And that's one of the issues, the biggest issues, is to have kids registered so they'll be able to keep track of them.
Great. I think we've also had another question posed about the link, and maybe this is something for Susan, the link between natural disasters and what's happening in humanitarian crises and human trafficking. I know we've talked in very specific ways about Haiti, but I don't know if you want to address anything from your perspective in the humanitarian area. What is the link, and what are we seeing in those arenas that might exacerbate human trafficking issues?
Yeah, well, I think it's exactly the way you just finished the clause, that what disasters do are that they exacerbate existing problems. And it's partly because you do have a breakdown of normal social structures. You have breakdown in families, people are separated, you have a breakdown in the rule of law, and you have a lot of people who don't have access to the basics, food, shelter, water, etc. And until you can get past that period, it means that all of the people who would otherwise be vulnerable to exploitation are just in an even worse situation because neither the societal structures are in place to protect them, nor are the self-protective factors in place. And so that if you have a culturally acceptable situation, such as children going into servitude, that just becomes something that gets aggravated as a result of the huge dislocations that occur as a result of the disaster. On the other hand, those huge dislocations also give you tremendous opportunities because when things are no longer just going on as they always have been, you have the opportunity to say, how can we do this differently? It's what President Clinton has been saying in building Haiti better. This is a chance in a place like Haiti to look at all of the underlying factors, and as the reconstruction process takes place, to put in place all of the protections that are necessary so that people are able to exercise their rights, have capabilities that they can enforce, and hopefully reduce the vulnerability rather than allow the situation to continue to fester.
Yes, and on that very hopeful note, I want to turn to each of you and
Karen?
Yes, go right ahead.
Before we leave that and go to your closing comment, I just would like to add just a comment to Dr. Martin's comments. I think there is a commitment by the U.S. government to build back better in Haiti, and former President Clinton has been providing leadership. Secretary Clinton is very committed to this, as are all the leaders here in the State Department. There's a multinational effort that has been that has come together with a tremendous commitment from the world to provide currently, food and water for more than 1 million people. Initially it was 3.5 million people, and we have this displacement has, in fact, shaken things, and it does, I think, this opportunity for us to work with these agencies to begin to work, for example, on passing the Trafficking in Persons Law, which is currently under consideration, which criminalizes all forms of trafficking. That would do a great deal to empower the Child Protection Brigade to be able to act in a manner that would allow them to intervene to protect children. And also to work closely with the social welfare agencies, as Jean-Robert Cadet mentioned. Those two agencies are really critical to the recovery. And there is no doubt that there's a clear commitment on behalf of this administration to do that. It's a complex and long-term effort, and our office is working with those goals in mind.
And that, I think, is a very hopeful note in the midst of what we see on the news every night and what we're trying to sort through in terms of where we place our own energies and efforts and commitments. So I ask each of you, and this is meant to be very open-ended. You can disregard totally what I'm asking you to do. You can talk about something else entirely, or if we've missed the boat and we really need some more information on some other issue, I'm welcoming that as well. We have an additional 15, 20 minutes here. So I wanted to, though, spend a little bit of time asking what you hope is the takeaway from this session. Hopefully, it's been the history of the CAR Center and these webcasts that people go on, and sometimes we have a larger audience going on, not live, but offline when we put this up in the archive. So I'd ask you to think about what you want that takeaway to be and what we can ask people to do either individually or collectively. We certainly have a lot of requests from people coming in about how to get involved. And even before the broadcast, people were asking, what can they do? It seems so overwhelming. Does anyone want to start the conversation?
Well, I think people should concentrate, especially American people, because the tax money is being used for foreign aid to Haiti, and I think the child slavery issue is something that the Haitian government must take ownership of. It's neglected, I think, because we just talked about the Brigade for the Protection of Minors. That brigade, I think, was financed by UNICEF. It's very, very poorly funded. And when a child runs away from West African slavery, that child is taken by the Department of Social Affairs to an NGO, and then the child is warehoused. Often they don't go to school. There's nothing for them to do. And then if that local NGO cannot find the biological parent of that child is basically locked up forever. There's nothing that child can do. That child's future is over. And when she is turned 18 or 19, she is released into the street. And then what does she do? She becomes a prostitute. There must be the Haitian government must be held accountable when it comes to children issues.
And of course, you're seeing the link there between one type of trafficking, domestic servitude, and then another type of exploitation, which is the compelled prostitution of a young girl. So that is just so heartbreaking to hear. But thank you, Jean Robert, for explaining the really important issues that are so compelling and so important to raise today. To hear the issue relating to warehousing of children, to really point out that their lives are over. I think that's what this conversation is all about, to create that awareness. And I thank you very deeply for that statement. I think it's a really important statement to leave us with. And I know social workers have written in, and people in law enforcement and others who have a very caring and generous heart. So maybe this is the opportunity for them to get more involved, make a donation, or even provide some professional assistance at some point in time. So we're reading you loud and clear. I hope other people are listening.
Thank
Karen,
you.
This is Jane at the State Department, and there are just a few things. We're very pleased that Harvard University is focusing on this issue, this very important issue, and doing your part to convey information. When we think about the takeaway and where do we go from here, a couple of thoughts. Just so people know, and who are participating in your webinar, there is a website, www.reliefweb.int. That provides information about humanitarian assistance in Haiti. But we also want folks to see that this is an opportunity for education and advocacy, not only in Haiti, but to understand the fact that there are, this is a global problem. There are millions of victims of slavery around the world, and we believe Haiti, we've been focusing in on the very specific issues in Haiti and the challenges of moving forward. But your listeners can think globally and act locally, is what a colleague of ours recently announced at a U.S. Department of Justice conference. There is plenty for folks to do in their own communities, because we in the United States struggle in our fight against human trafficking. It's far too frequent here in the United States as well. You Google human trafficking, and there are just tremendous numbers of activities and organizations involved. We do believe Haiti is particularly vulnerable this time, and we certainly encourage contributions to the humanitarian assistance effort that we will be participating with, along with the international community. So, human trafficking strikes close to home and far away from our homes, and we just appreciate your providing this opportunity to spread the word globally and throughout the United States, even more particularly so that others will understand that everyone can play a role in ending slavery today.
Great. Very well said. Thank you, Jane. I don't know if Susan or anyone wants to make any other statements.
Well, let me also extend my thanks and appreciation to the Carr Center for providing the webinar and bringing attention to these issues. And just repeat something that Jane just said, and that's that Haiti has got the attention. There are so many humanitarian emergencies around the world today which have not had the press coverage, have not had the attention from political figures, from the media that Haiti has had, that in which there are equal in some cases, like the Democratic Republic of Congo, just horrendous situations going on that pose great dangers to children, to women, to adolescents, etc. And so some of the lessons that we're learning in Haiti about how to both provide humanitarian assistance but also help protect people can be applied to these other situations. The other point that she made that I think is extremely important is that this has to be a sustained effort. The problems in Haiti are not going to be solved overnight. We as Americans tend too times to have a short attention span. As soon as the headlines are over, we tend to forget that there are a lot of people who have yet to rebuild their lives, that they're still in vulnerable situations. And in Haiti, as in these other humanitarian crises, we have to be in it for the long haul and make sure that the humanitarian aid is going where it's needed, is protecting vulnerable populations, giving livelihood support to those who have some capability to rebuild their economic lives, help them to rebuild their shelter, their housing, and their lives in general, rebuild the education, healthcare systems in Haiti and elsewhere. And that process, if it's done in a proper, well-monitored way, based with good principles of accountability, will do more to help people to avoid the dangers of trafficking than anything else that we could do. We really just need to give people back their lives and help them to live them in a much more sustainable way.
Yes. Casey?
Branchini from GTIP again. I just wanted to second what Dr. Martin said, and I also just wanted to thank the Carr Center for putting this on, and I think that it gave us a great opportunity and the foundation to start discussion with not only students, academics, and people on the ground fighting for the cause. So thank you.
I think that really wraps up very nicely what you both said at the very end here with Dr. Martin referencing other catastrophes, the Congo in particular. I know the work of the IOM in very many of these areas. We may be able to put up on the site afterwards some additional resources, so I would suggest all of those. In the interim, Jim has already directed us after Jane spoke about other sites. So we put up reliefweb.int, I believe it was, right, Jane?
Yes, and I would also say you can find information at www.usaid.gov, that's G-O-V/Haiti.
Right. In the interim, Jane, there was one question that was posed about what the status of the U.S. ranking is relating to the TIP report. I can use the prerogative of the chair here to say I know you can't give out any information relative to the new TIP report, but I thought maybe before we close you could give us a general idea of when people can look for that online and when it might be launched in general. Usually it's in this time frame of this part of the year, but I didn't know if it would be next month or...
Well, Karen, as you know, the Congress asks that we issue a report each year in June rating countries' efforts to combat human trafficking. And I believe our office is certainly, we've been working on this report for months now, and I believe that we'll be able to meet the Congress's expectations and deliver a report in June.
Very good. And so we'd suggest that people look online. There's usually an announcement with a big press release from the State Department, and we will also eagerly look forward to what the status of the United States efforts have been. Since many of our participants may not know, this is the first time the U.S. is voluntarily ranking itself. So I don't know whether that's going to create a new level of interest, but I would really tell people the TIP report's launch is always a very important time, and a lot of very good information about what's happening in various countries, and I'm sure we'll eagerly await what's going on with the U.S. ranking as well. With that being said, I want to thank each of you for a very informative 2 hours. It just flew by and made the job of moderator very easy. I hope this is the first of many discussions. The efforts that are underway are so laudatory, and I can't say enough how humbling it is to be a part of this whole effort. I want to thank Jim again for the technical expertise. I want to thank Christina Bain for all of her vision and wisdom and insight to get this all working and going and moving ahead with the Carr Center's efforts. And I also want to thank a person who's probably not thanked very often, but Greg Carr, the head of the founder of the Carr Center and one of the major leaders in terms of being on the board and being the inspiration. And I just want to say it's a humbling experience to with Harvard on these issues, and I can't say enough about working in the future. May we have many more webcasts on these important issues involving human trafficking, and I thank the Center and the Kennedy School for all of its efforts in this regard. I would welcome your looking at the website. Sure, Jim mentioned 3 or 4 days that we'll have the archives up, and we'll still be taking additional resources for that. So thank you very much. I want to say goodbye to each of you.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
Hey, Karen.